So, Jamie, it would be awesome to get started with a little bit of your journey into the world of veganism. What brought you here?
Absolutely. Well, first of all, thank you so much for having me. This is really an honor to be on here and to speak with you and your community. I'm super excited to share a little bit about me, about my journey, in hopes of helping people get more active, in hopes of getting vegan curious folks to join the light, to come into the light. I went vegan almost 5 years ago. I was always an animal lover. I had a dog growing up. I just, walking down the street, I would go running up to dogs and be like, can I pet your dog? Can I pet your dog? So it was this, inside of my heart, I always loved animals. But obviously I was disconnected in a sense that when it came to what was on my plate, I didn't think twice about what happened to that animal to get there. And in fact, I just don't think I even had made the connection that the animal that was on my plate suffered, that it was confined its whole life, that it was murdered in a sense in the end. So I started to learn about how factory farming worked over the years in school. I think in middle school they actually showed us a movie called Forks Over Knives. If I'm not mistaken, I think that's what it was. And it was just that kind of something that was always in my mind, but I never fully acted on it. Because I think also as a child, somebody growing up, you're concerned about being accepted. You want to be with your friends and you don't want to be the odd one out. And obviously taking a big step towards veganism back then, it wasn't even trendy or cool. It was nobody that I knew was vegan. I maybe had like one vegetarian friend, but it wasn't something that was as widespread as it is today. So I was 13 when I visited my grandparents one summer in Indiana, and I was in the car, we were driving along the highway, and a livestock truck pulled alongside us, and there were pigs inside of there. And this was a really, really hot day in the summer, probably over 90 degrees. And I just remember seeing these little snouts peering through one of the holes and just feeling really uncomfortable about it. Because deep down, I knew where they were going. I knew that they weren't going to summer camp. They were going to a slaughterhouse. And I was sitting in the car, and my dog was sitting next to me. And I remember thinking in that moment, what is the difference between these animals and the one sitting right next to me? And for dinner that night, I remember my grandparents were cooking pork chops or something that was the flesh of a pig. And I just remember being like, I don't want to eat that. And I was like, I would go through these phases where from 13 on, I would be like, I'm not eating red meat anymore. I'm not eating chicken anymore. I'm not eating pork. And it actually became this running joke in my family, like, are you vegetarian this week or are you eating this? And because it was this battle, this inner battle that I was going through, where I didn't really have any vegan role models, or I didn't know too many vegans, but I knew that I sort of wanted to go in that direction. It was always a goal. It was never something that I looked at and thought, oh, those vegans, they're nuts. Like, it was never that. It was always like, I think I aspire to be like that one day, if I could figure out how the hell to do it. Little did I know how easy it is, and especially today in 2022. So that was, when I was 13, it was my first exposure to the truth. It was the first time I came face to face with how my food got to the plate. And throughout my high school years, as I said, I kind of went on and off. I was a little bit off track. I definitely wasn't ethically fully there yet, but I knew that it was wrong. And I think if I had that extra push and I had seen something like Cowspiracy or What the Health, in those years, I would have made the connection sooner. But being that it's so normalized in our society to eat animals, I just didn't really know any better. So it wasn't until I was about 17 or 18, I was in college, and I saw some slaughter footage on Facebook. It sounds so casual as I say it. It's just because I see it all the time now, being a vegan activist, but I came across this footage and I was horrified. I mean, when I tell you hyperventilating, crying, like, oh my God, this is horrible. I didn't know this happened. And I didn't fully know about the dairy and egg industries yet, but I knew that, wow, like, I am not eating meat anymore. That is disgusting. That is horrible. I love animals. And it was kind of the first step in the direction that I took to aligning my own morals with my actions. So fast forward about 6 months later, I would say, I took the Veganuary challenge. And this is January 1st. You know how people always want to do a diet, or they plan to work out, or they come up with these New Year's resolutions. So I guess you could say my New Year's resolution was to go vegan. And it was for a month, and I was like, I'm probably only going to do this for a month. I don't know if I could last. You know, the classic "I love cheese" line was kind of the mindset that I was in. But within that month, what I loved so much about Veganuary was that they provided me with so much information. So they would send recipes to my email, they would send me information about the dairy and egg industries, but it was in a way that allowed me to look into it for myself, as opposed to them saying, you need to do this, here is, you know, the horrific slaughter footage. I actually had to click around, and it was almost as if I was discovering it for myself. Yeah. And maybe psychologically that helped, and that got me to go fully vegan, and I never looked back from that day. So I became an activist a couple months later. At first I was very quiet, believe it or not, about being vegan. I really didn't say too much about it. I would go to steakhouses, I would sit around the table while there were animal products, and I felt really bad for the animals, and as long as I wasn't contributing to it, it was okay, And then I started going to AV Cubes, and for those of you guys that aren't familiar with AV, it's basically an organization where we stand around in public spaces with television screens that show footage of animal agriculture. It just shows standard practices, how these industries work, and people in the public can go up to these TV screens and look at what the footage is, and we kind of talk to them and provide information. And it's very educational, very peaceful, and I really aligned with it at first. And when I first did my first AV Cube, I just felt empowered. I was like, wow, like I'm making a difference. I'm gonna change the world. Everybody's gonna go vegan, And little did I know, it's a lot harder than you think. So you're very optimistic, and I got very, very passionate. And the next thing you know, one thing leads to another. I'm going to slaughterhouse vigils. I'm doing rescues. I'm going to anti-fur disruptions, which are just like invigorating. It's like this energy. I can't describe it. And I fully went just full force into this lifestyle.
Yeah. It fascinates me that you went into activism so wholeheartedly so quickly. I mean, you describe it like, I was sat there in the restaurants for like a couple of months or so, but that's not a long period of time. And many people are just sort of figuring out their own personal veganism and what that means to them, and so on and so forth in those first couple of months. Do you think that, looking back, joining the dots backwards, you kind of always had an activist streak within you, or do you think this brought it out, the sense of injustice?
It's interesting that you ask that, because I always feel that, at least throughout my schooling years and with all my friends, I was always the fun and lighthearted person. I really never wanted to get into politics or argue. It's just not really in my character. But going vegan, I really do think brought out this activism streak in me, where I don't think I've ever been so passionate about something, because you're speaking up about something so outside of yourself that it was no longer about me. It was like, I don't care if people see me as crazy. I need to get this message out there because I am going to change the world, and I just want animals to stop suffering. And so I took many different routes with activism, and I think a lot of people, when we first go vegan, it's this really rude awakening. You start to see the world in such a different way. I went from being this young, optimistic, I guess you could say party girl in high school, very fun, easygoing, to just really hardcore and very, I don't want to say stern or depressed or whatever it was, but very, like, my whole life and world revolved around animals and speaking up about this. And I think for a while there, I lost myself. Everything was about the animals for me, and it started to divide me, I guess, from a lot of people that I loved, because I couldn't understand why the people that I loved so much were participating in this harm, especially after I provided this information to them. It just made absolutely no sense. And I think as vegans, this is something we deal with every single day. Why don't people get it? You know, here's the information. I changed after I saw it. Why won't you? So
how do you kind of square that in your mind? Because that, I think, is one of the biggest things we all as vegans face, particularly when it's loved ones, particularly when it's people close to us. We care about them. We think that we're aligned, broadly speaking, especially with our friends. You know, you don't, the old, you know, you don't choose your family, but you do choose your friends. So you often feel like quite closely aligned with them on so many issues, viewpoints on maybe something that is current in the current news cycle, or you know, on your choice of your opinions on art and your opinions on music and these kind of things. Like, we're often so aligned, and then it comes to like something that you hold so deep and so close to you, and your friends can't see the same things. How have you kind of learned to square that, if you have?
Well, it's devastating to me, you know. Every single day I question, I'm like, am I missing something here? Like, why do I see this but you don't? And I guess the way that I square it is I try to be a little optimistic and maybe try to think that, oh, they just really don't understand. Like, they say, oh yeah, I know what happens in the dairy industry. But do they really? Like, have they actually sat and watched baby cows be shot in the head? I don't know. I don't think so. Like, I think that there has to be a level of ignorance to it. Yeah, maybe there are some people that are just total jerks, that are selfish, that don't care, that have seen the footage. I'm sure there are people like that out there. But at least for the ones that I hold in my inner circle, I don't think they fully know. I think they've seen a bunch of my films, and it's very easy to slip through the cracks. Everything that we see and everything that we are surrounded by is yummy advertisements of that double cheeseburger online. It's whenever you go out to restaurants, these products are everywhere. So it's very easy to just bat an eye and just, you know, kind of go on with your daily life. And it's very easy to be around in social circles and see everybody else doing it, that you think it's okay. I don't blame people necessarily for, some people are just not leaders. They want to just stay comfortable. They want to follow suit, and so they do. And when you go vegan, it really is, I think, you're stepping outside of your comfort zone, and you are drawing attention to a very important, pressing issue. And a lot of people just don't want to know, because they want to stay comfortable in their ways and set in their ways. So I see veganism as the moral baseline, the bare minimum, you know. And I think people have this misconception that when you go vegan, you're sacrificing taste, you're sacrificing pleasure, you're sacrificing time with your friends and family. But I've only found it to be the opposite. I've eaten incredible foods. I've had amazing times with friends and family where we go to these crazy vegan restaurants that you wouldn't even know are missing, you know, animal body parts. You know, it's like, it's brought so many pleasant new experiences to me. I feel so much more connected with the earth around me. As, you know, hippie as that may sound, it's true. And I just think it's been this awakening for me where I'm just trying to be the best person I can be. And if somebody comes up to me and they tell me that, oh, you know, that coffee that you're drinking in the morning, that caused, you know, a person to suffer, I'm going to stop drinking that coffee. Like, I really do try to be open-minded and listen to people and see how my actions can reduce suffering. As human beings, it's impossible to be perfect, but how can we reduce suffering? And then the next step is to speak up about it and become active.
Yeah. Thinking about that speaking up, and you mentioned obviously you went kind of fairly early on headlong into street activism and so on and so forth. When you started to do that, that can be quite a daunting thing for people. It's got a degree of confrontational kind of nature about it. And you mentioned as you were growing up, that wasn't you necessarily. How were those first experiences for you, and how has that kind of evolved for you in perhaps your approach to that kind of street activism?
Totally. So, as I mentioned, I was vegan for a while, a couple months without speaking up. I don't even think people fully knew I was vegan because I was so quiet about it. But I visited my cousin out in California, and she was one of the organizers for AV in San Francisco. And she told me, she's like, listen, if you, obviously you care about this issue, but if you want to help to inform people and you want to make change, we have to speak up. And AV is a great way to do that. And I was like, what the hell is that? Like, I was like, I'll come to this thing with you, but like, I don't know. It's kind of uncomfortable for me, obviously. So I went to this AV cube and I started listening to these conversations she was having with passerbyers. And it was so powerful the way that she was able to leave an impact on these people's lives, you know, not just for the animals, but for their health too. You know, people are going around eating all these products and we wonder why quote unquote healthy looking individuals that are 40, 50 years old are dropping dead of heart attacks. It's not a coincidence that, you know, the red meat that they're eating, the animal products in general, are clogging up their arteries. So, you know, she may very well have just extended somebody's life expectancy. And while we were there, a woman came up to her, my cousin, and said, you know, I just want to let you know, I've been vegan for about 6 months since the last time I saw you here. Since the last time we spoke. And it was that first time where I was like, oh my God, wow. Like, she really left a great impression on this person and made change. So I originally had to get over this like fear of not being liked, I guess, and this fear of judgment. And I think what helped me do that was I was so confident that I knew the information. I didn't just go out on the street and start talking about this, you know, and be like, I'm vegan because I love animals. I really had facts to back it up. And I really knew, okay, I basically learned how to speak to people in a way that uses the Socratic method. And that's what AV does, where the Socratic method is where you speak to people through questioning. So instead of me just blabbing on and telling people, you know, you need to do this, this, and this, I ask them questions which kind of guides the conversation to get them to realize themselves what their morals and what their beliefs are, and then how we can align that with the animal stuff. So I've had many conversations with people where maybe at first they just don't align with the animals. They're not animal people. They really just are selfish and don't care. I can't force people to care, right? But this person might as well just be very health oriented. And that is a route that I will try to take with people, where I'll start asking, so, you know, what is it that you care? Like, what is it that they care about? And then how can I guide the conversation from there to get them to see, wow, like going on a fully plant-based diet is healthy. It is scientifically proven that we can thrive and survive on being on a vegan diet. So it's a route that we can take, and I think knowing the information is what is the step that I took first to then feel comfortable speaking up, because now it's at a point where I'm not intimidated by anybody because I know that I'm right all the time. You know, it's true.
And how has it evolved in terms of, you know, perhaps thinking about the way you react to that when people are challenging you, perhaps on the street? Like, as your sort of approach to that evolved over the course of time in terms of, you know, were you perhaps slightly more strident in your opinion at the beginning, and then you perhaps learned to kind of soften in certain ways, or perhaps the opposite? Has it evolved over the course of time?
Oh yeah, that is a really good question. So I started with the AV cubes, and then I met other people that were going to slaughterhouse vigils. And this destroyed me. I'll be completely honest. Like, seeing animals face to face moments before they were gonna have their throat slit, it just changes you. I mean, it really got me going full force into activism. I it was the first thing I thought about in the morning, last thing I thought about before I went to bed. And I just wanted to do anything and everything all the time to speak about this issue for them. And it got a little dangerous to a certain point where I didn't have that proper balance of like a personal life and activism. Everything was kind of blended together. And when you're constantly exposed to all this suffering, it's like, how long can you do that for? And I was doing all of these disruptions where I was going into grocery stores, and sometimes it would be a silent disruption where I would just stand in the meat aisle with a TV screen showing the footage of how it got there. But sometimes it would be speak outs, and I would do a whole speech, you know, whether it would be about, you know, these animals would have shown you love, they would have shown you kindness, you know, every single one of these animals were individuals. Like, it was always peaceful. I never attacked anybody violently or anything like that. But it did come to a point where I had to start analyzing, how can I be most effective? What is going to get people to listen the most? And I think that doing that is effective in a certain way because it reaches an audience that might relate more to that style of activism. And then there's people that might react to a less aggressive form. You know, I don't think that there's really a wrong way to do activism. I think the only wrong way is to not do anything at all. So it just started to evolve over time where I'm working for this film company straight out of college. It's called Cave Light Films. And so, as I was saying, I was going to all these vigils at the slaughterhouses, and this is in college. So, like, every other week at, like, 5 a.m., I'm at a freaking slaughterhouse before class, you know, giving animals water, and it's, like, traumatizing. You know, I try to hide, you know, all these emotions and feelings inside, but it manifests in other ways. And I just started to become this, like, really sad person. I'm, like, losing myself in a way. And anyway, I went to this animal rights march, and this filmmaker, his name's Jordan, he's the director of Cave Light Films, he came up to me at the march and he was like, "What does your shirt say?" And at the time I was wearing a Newark Animal Save shirt, and it said Newark Animal Save. And he was like, "What do you guys do there?" And so I started telling him, we give the animals water, we document the conditions to expose what's going on inside these slaughterhouses. And he was like, "Can I come and film it?" So he came and filmed a morning in September of a vigil at the slaughterhouse. And this film that he made, it's called The Save Movement. If you look up The Save Movement, Cave Light Films, it'll come right up. And it really, it was just very raw and genuine. It was us giving these animals water, and it was this altercation, this interaction that we had with the farmer that was unloading the animals. And this film ended up going viral. It got over 20 million views. Now this ended up posting it. And it made me start to think about, how can my voice have a big impact, and how can I get this message out there on a larger scale? You know, I'm at the time I was only speaking to one person at a time at AV Cubes. I was talking to my friends and family, but like nobody was really budging. And I'm like, how can I have a bigger impact? And so through film is where I've been able to find this voice where I'm like, wow, I can reach a lot of people through this. So right when I graduated college in 2020, it was the pandemic, and Jordan, the director of Cave Light, said, "Why don't you come and intern with me for the summer, and let's see, you know, what we can make. Let's you know, do a film." So during the pandemic, the perfect angle to take is the wet markets. People are pointing the finger at China. They're blaming China for the coronavirus, but everybody's failing to neglect that we have over 80 plus live animal markets in New York City. And being that's where I live, Jordan and I gathered hundreds and hundreds of hours of undercover footage from these live animal markets, these filthy, disgusting wet markets in New York. And we created a film called The Fight to Ban Live Animal Markets. That got 10 million views. And just seeing the comments on there, I mean, of course, you get the people that are like, "I'm eating 3 chicken sandwiches because you posted this," you know, like, stupid. It's like, be more original, please. Like, I haven't heard that before. But we saw a ton of comments being like, "I'm going vegan. Like, this is disgusting." this is where my food comes from. And it started, our whole goal with Cave Light is to get animal agriculture information mainstream. So we've created about 4 films since, after that film, and everything from the fashion industry to the story of Regan Russell, where she was run over and hit by a truck, to the lingerie protest. So my activism started expanding to, okay, how can I reach more people? I'm down to do anything, by any means necessary, to wake people up. And so I saw that 2 activists in Australia, Tosh Peterson and Stefania Ferrario, were doing these lingerie protests where they were standing in public places in, skimpy clothing and holding up signs about animal agriculture. And people were very receptive to it. And I think it's because they were vulnerable and people didn't feel attacked. These 2 women were in their bras and underwears and basically by any means necessary trying to get this information out there. People were taking photos with them. It went viral on social media. So I said, why don't we do this here in New York? Like, what the hell? And also, part of what I try to do in my activism is show, like, look, you can be fit, you can look good as a vegan. I take pride in my health. I work out a lot. I'm like, well, let me use my body also for the animals that have no control whatsoever over their bodies or what's happening to them. I think it's very empowering to be able to use my body to push this message forward. And being that it's completely consensual, it's what I want to do, I did it. And I felt very empowered, and it really was very effective. So we made a film called The Lingerie Protest. And since then, we're working on a ton more stuff. And so my activism evolved in a way where I I do find a good balance between, work, activism, and my own personal life, where I do have to take a break from it sometimes, and not be so full force all the time. Otherwise, I'm not going to be able to sustain myself for the long run.
Yeah. Yeah. Thinking about it's an incredible amount of work, and what strikes me is the different angles. Like you said, by any means necessary. Of thinking about, this won't appeal to some people, but it will appeal to others, and you've kind of made your peace with that. Thinking about that, because I think that's a difficult thing to do. Some people don't necessarily feel comfortable enough to take that approach. That actually the kind of the greater good, if you like, is more important than whether I'm getting called out in social media for you're doing the wrong method here, you shouldn't be doing that, you shouldn't be doing this. Thinking about I suppose the one that jumps to mind is the lingerie protest, because you read through the comment section in under a video that's related to that, and you'll see 2 sides of an argument within the vegan community, and both probably fairly vocal and quite forthright, shall we say, in their kind of approach to whether you're doing the right thing or the wrong thing. Again, thinking about that, how has that made you feel? How comfortable has it made you with the kind of the future projects and thinking about what you do, or do you just take the view that people are going to say what they're going to say, the greater good is more important for me? I
think as an activist or anybody that's standing up against the status quo, you got to have thick skin. Because you are going to get a ton of hate comments. You're going to get a ton of people that are like, they don't agree with you. And that's fine. And even vegans, they don't have to necessarily agree with my approach. And the beauty of it is that they can do activism as they see fit and as they see effective. But what I often find is these same people that are commenting, this isn't helpful, this isn't doing anything, are the ones that are sitting behind their computers not doing anything at all themselves to make an impact. So I think it's important to try any outlet and every outlet to get media, to raise awareness. I don't think that by me going out in my lingerie is going to not make somebody vegan. They were either just not vegan to begin with and they're not changing, or there's a possibility that they might, and it might get them thinking. And with any change in somebody's life, it's a process, It's about planting seeds. I don't know if necessarily any conversation I've had alone has been the thing that wakes people up. Oftentimes it's seeing the message multiple times along the way, and then maybe when I speak to them, it's that final click for them,
Yeah.
So for me, it was a process. I went back and forth for years. And my only regret is that I didn't do it sooner. But yeah, I think with anything, you got to have thick skin, and sometimes it's just helpful to not read through the comments or just laugh them off or whatever it is. I actually wanted to mention I started up this YouTube channel. It's Jamie's Corner is what it's called. And with the film company, with Cave Light, we decided to start recording some of my conversations in the park as I approach people about the ethics of eating animals. And it's just kind of using humor and just my own personality, because as I said, I lost myself for a little bit and I wanted to take that back. So it's like, how can I just be myself and use humor to talk about this stuff to get people to listen? There's nothing funny about what happens to the animals, but what's funny is the situation, and it's the awkwardness, and it's, you know, me just being an idiot, you know? So it's really, it's I think, another approach to activism. And I think sometimes if we're only focusing on, you know, all the sad things and all the, you know, horrific things that happen to animals, people aren't going to look. And it's painful to watch that. I mean, I don't blame them. Who wants to sit down and watch slaughter footage, you know?
Yeah.
There's a reason that they don't show it in supermarkets while people are buying these products. It's very painful when you actually process and wake up to this truth. So I think, you know, with the Jamie's Corner stuff, I get a lot of, you know, hate comments, and not necessarily from vegans usually. It's mostly from meat eaters. The vegans actually have been pretty supportive, but the people that eat animals, I mean, you get every comment in the world from, you know, go kill yourself to like, this fact is wrong, do the blah, 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 blah. It's like this issue is a very complicated topic, believe it or not. And when you actually go and break down the environmental facts, the health facts, it's not just something that I can answer in a 30-second clip. It's something that takes decades of research to actually break down and understand. I mean, with the environment stuff, people have no idea how many resources go into raising an animal, killing an animal, storing their body parts. The amount of land that we use just to grow their food alone is absurd. And when you try to break this down and simplify it, people will get all up in arms and be like, oh, well, this number is this number. And it's like, no matter what angle you look at it, the carbon emissions, the water usage, the resources used in animal agriculture far exceed what our planet is able to sustain for the future. So it's as I kind of was saying before, I think as an activist or a vegan just in general, it's so important to know your facts and know your information. And one resource that I found super helpful is, number one, Faunalytics is a really good resource for just giving you data. And also there's Physicians Committee, which I think Dr. Greger, if you're interested in health, there's all these different answers to the soy myth, you know, because they think that soy gives you boobs. It's like, please, if soy gave you boobs, I'd be eating it every day. You know, like I've had triple D's if soy gave you boobs, and I have A's. So anyway, the point that I'm trying to make, I guess, is that we just need to come at this stuff from every angle and know your research, know your facts, watch the documentaries, What the Health, Cowspiracy, read Earthling Ed's ebook, and it'll kind of show you how to answer some of these tough questions that often come our way as vegans.
Thinking about, like, as we've talked about, there's so many different approaches. You've taken a lot of them already in the sort of 4 or 5 years that you've been vegan. When you look back, has each one informed the next one? So sort of, you know, when you come to planning your next kind of idea of, like, you know, how can I reach more people, are you kind of drawing upon all of your experiences from the past and saying, okay, well, that worked, that didn't work? Or are you almost coming at it from a, like, let's just start afresh, like, what else could we throw at the wall, if you like, that will stick? Yeah,
I think it's a mix of both. I think it's super important to keep being creative and coming up with new ideas, because clearly the world is not vegan yet, so we need to keep doing it. So I definitely take from prior experiences, like when we were doing the grocery store disruptions a lot, we would oftentimes run into conflict with the police, and knowing your rights and understanding the laws behind that, and long story short, if they ask you to leave, you leave. You know, what's the point of getting thrown in jail over that? I'd rather be thrown in jail for doing a rescue, you know? So kind of like weighing those pros and cons, and then using that prior experience to then fuel my future actions, and really just know my rights and know what we need to do to like have an effective action, I guess. And what I've also found is that with any action, it's super important to post on social media, because yeah, I might reach the 25 people that are in the supermarket, but when you post it, you're reaching hundreds, sometimes thousands of people. So getting good video and good audio is super important. You know, nowadays you got the iPhone, you can get really good video from that. You can, if you can, invest in a microphone. If not, just get the audio from the iPhone. Just anything. And, you know, the power of social media, you're able to have a lot of important information spread pretty quickly.
Is there anything that when you look back you think that just didn't work? Like as an approach, that just didn't work, and if I'd had my time again I wouldn't do that. And I ask specifically with perhaps the filter of when you're doing what you're doing, you're putting yourself out there in so many different ways and you're trying new things and you're being creative. Inevitably you're sort of, if you like, you're testing things in public, you know, in the, especially with the world of social media, you're testing things out in public so everyone can see like the stuff that went well and the stuff that didn't go so well and all this kind of stuff. So has there been anything where you think that, you know what, that just didn't really land, and what was the kind of like, how did you deal with then the reaction of that, you know, perhaps from other vegans perhaps saying, you know, that didn't work, or calling you out for it?
Yeah,
if that happened.
That's a good question. I think, yeah, as an activist and just as a person in general trying new things out, yeah, you're always gonna, I guess, quote unquote, fail. But it's hard to judge that, because I don't know if any of those actions may have made somebody go vegan or start thinking about it.
Yeah, true.
So it's like, to me, that's a win. In any way you look at it.
Even if it's one.
Even if it's one person. Right.
Yeah.
Like, as I said before, the one action that I did is not going to, like, make or break the situation. It's not like somebody's going to be like, well, now I'm never going vegan. No, they were never going to go vegan in the first place. So I think it's hard to judge that. But I guess one thing that I'm actually dealing with right now is the dilemma of if I should sit down at a table where there are animal products being served. For the past 2 years, I have not. It makes me uncomfortable. The smell of the products make me uncomfortable. It's usually not a pleasant experience for myself or the people that I'm with. But it's like I go back and forth, because I find that if you could be a positive influence and show people the food on your plate and kind of just be there, it's like it's in a way on their guilty conscience just by you being there. And if you can kind of be positive, and I find that I miss out on a lot of things. Like, I don't go to Thanksgiving with my family anymore, so it's like this dilemma that I'm trying to face. And the other day my boyfriend's mom said to me, she's like, you know, like, we really want to go to dinner with Satya, my boyfriend, and his brother, and this and that, like, would you be able to, like, budge a little bit? And it's really difficult, because it's like I don't want people to look at me as this extremist, crazy vegan. Like, I'm just simply a person that doesn't want to see animals be harmed. That's it at its core. And so it's like the absurdity of it is that if she had said to me, oh, like, you know, there's going to be a dead dog on the table, like, could you just suck it up and sit down? That's how I see it. That's how I hear it. I don't see the difference between a chopped up pig on the table and a chopped up dog. It's the same thing to me. So it's like, do I sit down, and is that me then saying that it's okay and giving my blessing to it? You know what I mean? Like, I will never be okay with that. So it's like, I don't know what the right answer is. And for the past 2 years, it's felt wrong to do. But I just, again, I'm always looking for ways, how can I be the most effective? And is by me not going more effective, or is by me being there and being able to be positive more effective?
Well, that's like a fascinating point, isn't it, really? And I think actually when we think about it, all vegans have to kind of square that to some extent, and probably 99% come to the conclusion that, well, I have to be amongst it Because if you think about like
Yeah.
when we go to like supermarkets and so on, like unless you shop in a completely vegan shop, which is pretty difficult to find, you're essentially indirectly, if not funding animal agriculture, you're kind of, you know, you're supporting that business to do well. They may be investing their money in, you know, they're going to buy more chicken for that particular month or whatever. That's a very simplistic way to put it, how a supermarket works, but you know, we kind of all have to square that. And in so many different walks of life, you know, like we have to perhaps work in jobs where there are non-vegans. I mean, you could get it right down to the extent of like, do I ever want to be served by someone in a retail store who's not vegan? Or, you know, you could go down, you know, you buy the new vegan trainers or something that a particular brand has released, but they're sold in the shop that sells leather. So how do you square that sort of stuff? It's really difficult. I think most people kind of come to the conclusion, well, I've got to be kind of part of it and put almost, I think you're absolutely right. I think probably most vegans feel like, well, what's the difference between your dog and that pig? But we kind of have to put that almost to one side, which feels like a real bit of ethical gymnastics to do. But it's like, well, what else do you do apart from withdraw yourself from society completely? And in which case, then you're not going to make anybody else vegan.
Exactly.
You know, if you have withdrawn.
It's this ethical
so it's
dilemma.
really difficult.
Yeah, it's
really difficult.
very difficult, because also on the same end of the coin, it's like I go around, I'm preaching this message. I'm like, please, like, stop harming animals, and then I sit down at the table where they're there. It feels so hypocritical. But I think for a while, especially as I you know, was in my full force activism, like was so not myself, I definitely was not a positive force to be around. And I had to remove myself from those situations, because there were times where I would just start crying. Like I would literally lose it. And it's not pleasant for anybody. And in fact, it doesn't draw any positivity to the movement at all. No. And instead, people are just going to look at vegans as, you know, these crazy people. And we're so not. Like, if anything, the only people that are crazy are the ones that are paying for these intelligent, smart, cute little baby animals to be hacked up into pieces. That, to me, is insane. Yeah, we just don't know it. And I think, as I was saying before, it's like, if people were shopping in the supermarket and the footage of how that body part got to the plate was playing in the supermarket, most people would not buy it. John Lennon's quote, if slaughterhouses had glass windows, glass walls, we would probably see a vegan world, or mostly vegan. So yeah, that's kind of what I'm going through now. But yeah, I mean, there's tons of times that I've failed, I guess you could say, where I've stuttered, you know, I'm doing these chants, we're at this fur protest and I like bomb the words, stuff like that, you know, and it happens, like whatever, like, but I think when I keep the animals in mind and I stop thinking about myself and my ego and what people think of me, I'm so much more powerful. And my friend Ryuji, Peace by Vegan, he was just on the Trevor Noah show, the Daily Show, 2 days ago. I went with him to the screening, and he was so nervous. He was like, oh my God, like, what do I do? And I said, Ryuji, you just keep the animals in mind. Like, you are about to have this message reach thousands and thousands of people. Like, you got this. You know what I mean? This is what we're here for. Don't worry. It's not about you. Nobody's judging you. Like, let's be effective. Let's get this message out there. And he killed it. Getting this stuff mainstream. Talking about what happens to fish, you know, and he was also talking about cows, chickens, turkeys, you know. It was amazing. And that's what we need to be doing. Yeah.
100%. 100%. Let's talk about your podcast. It'd be remiss of us not to talk about that.
Sure.
As we're on a podcast now.
Thanks.
So how did that come about? Was it just like, what else can I do? Another form? Let's get involved.
Totally. So the podcast has had a few evolutions. It's changed a few times. In college is when I started it. So about 3 or 4 years ago. It was called Under the Vegfluence. And in college, every single project that I had to do for school had to do with animal rights, because I was like, well, if I'm gonna do this work, I might as well do something worthwhile, you know? Like, I'm trying to outreach all of my professors here. And so one of the projects that I had to do was create a podcast. And so I called it Under the Vegfluence, and I started talking about, you know, these industries and how they work, and everything that you can imagine, kind of what you do on here. And then I guess a year later, I was like, I want to change it. I'm going to call it Drop the Knife. And then it was like this hardcore, you know, animal rights podcast, similar vibe. Like, I had some really great guests on, you know, Leah Dolinger. I had Tosh Peterson, like, you know, all these great activists, and just hopes of spreading the message even further. And now the podcast, it's part of just the brand that I have today. It's called It's Jamie's Corner podcast. It's on Apple, Spotify, you name it. And I talk a lot about spirituality. I have people in yoga, and I try to tie in all these different forms that I think relate to veganism. And I want it to just be a platform to speak about a lot of different issues pertaining to the animal rights stuff. I mean, obviously the center focus is animal rights, but I definitely have opened it up more, and I think it's very helpful to get people interested in veganism, interested in the message, and I'm just still doing it every week and just trying to grow it. And honestly, what I find, at least with podcasting, I don't know if you find it the same way, I find that it's a great networking tool. Like, I meet all these great people from all over the world. You know, you and I probably, I mean, who knows if we would have met, you know, especially now that you don't fly on planes. So, so
that's true.
You know, and then you get to meet all these great people. So I use it kind of as a tool to do that. And also it's a nice way to spread ideas, you know, and be like, oh, maybe we could come up with some actions together. Anything helps.
100%. Yeah, couldn't agree more with the networking piece. I think you're absolutely right. You're forever, like, I always think, even if no one is listening to this, I've met somebody new, and I end up then being introduced to a couple more people. They usually talk about somebody that I haven't heard of yet, and then I research that person, and before you know it, they're on the show, and then, you know, your network just expands. And I find like I mean, there's obviously only 1% of the population or whatever that are vegan, so I find it's quite a small world in a way. Like, whenever I'm talking to somebody who, you know, might be in 3,000 or 4,000 miles away from where I am, but they know 10 people who I have also spoken to, and it's a kind of small world.
Yeah, exactly. Nice. And then what's so great too is, you know, when you're traveling or when you're in town, or we could meet up, like, I can't tell you how many great, amazing people that I've come across through the vegan community that are now some of my closest friends, that we've met through either podcasting or through an action. And I would say my advice to vegans, non-vegans alike, is just finding that support system and surrounding yourself by like-minded people. 100%. Because it's very easy to go nuts in this world. You know, there's just so much suffering, human rights, animal rights, the environment. It's like, how do you even cope with this? So knowing that there's other people that feel the same way you do and that are working to fight this oppression every single day is so helpful. And it's important to do vegan potlucks. It's important to have vegan outings where it's not just full force activism all the time, because it's impossible. Trust me, I did it. It's impossible to sustain that. It's impossible to be perfect. All of us are going to have a carbon footprint whether we try or not. And if the best thing that you could do is to die, and it's like, that's not really an option. Like, I mean, it is, it'd be terrible, but you know, if we want the planet to thrive and survive, humans are parasites to the earth, right? So finding that support system and surrounding yourself by like-minded people, and just knowing in your heart, like, you're on the right path, like, you believe in this, and just stick with this, and we're gonna create a much more compassionate, kind world. And it's already, I think, slowly but surely happening. We have to have some sort of optimism with any social movement. You know, you have to have hope. Otherwise, what's the point in doing anything?
That's a beautiful place to wrap us up, Jamie. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
It's been wonderful chatting with you. It'd be completely remiss of us not to tell folks though where they could find your many projects. So I know that might be a long list. I'm happy to have the full list, or you can abridge it if you like. But where would folks come to find you?
Definitely. So my main personal Instagram is JayloKurtz, JayloKurtz. And then my podcast, my show, the YouTube show, which I think you guys will find fun, is called It's Jamie's Corner. And if you just go to itsjamiescorner.com, all the links are on there. But really, I think what you should check out is Cave Light Films. I'm a producer at the company. We're working tirelessly, day in and day out, to create these important documentaries and reach mainstream media, reach the public, and our videos have over 75 million views. We are getting the message out there, so check out Cave Light Films. It's just Cave Light Films on all platforms.
Amazing. Jamie, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.
Really appreciate it.
Thank you so much. Bye, guys.